So the last one was called Godzilla versus Kong. This one is Godzilla X Kong because, they're buddies now. They're friends. X. It's no longer VS. It's X. I think, Bahir, that the Americans have finally figured out what to do with this franchise. I think they now know which space to occupy. Like the Japanese Godzilla movies were quite separate. And we've spoken about this before, but things like Shin Godzilla, Godzilla Minus One, there's always a big societal component to it. Just like in the original Godzilla novellas, there was always this big metaphorical societal component on how this massive monster storming through the streets in the city of Tokyo reflects Japanese society. The Americans never felt too concerned with that sort of thing, whether it was the Emmerich Godzilla or even the newer Godzilla and these series of movies. They tend to be a little more focused on the idea of a disaster film. In those sorts of films, the human characters are almost always exactly the same. You get a scientist, you get a family. For some reason, there's always a little kid. And you're like, this is a highly dangerous situation. Why do we have a kid? But, there's always a kid. And the tropes are the same. No one listens to the scientist. Bad things happen. They have to go on the run and save themselves. And in the end, everyone's covered in black ash. And they're like, humans are all the same. That's pretty much what happens. However, in Godzilla X Kong, The New Empire, I think Adam Wingard has decided to throw all that shit to the wind and just go, this is a monster movie. I think it's good.
I'm not a fan.
I really enjoyed it.
I got bored.
For me, this is like a solid 7, 8 out of 10.
Ooh, too high for me.
Really?
I'll be honest, I was kind of bored. Not bored. Sorry, bored's not the right word. I thought it was draggy. I just didn't care. I think the problem was I just didn't care. I think there was too many things going on. They kept Godzilla and Kong apart for essentially the majority of the film.
It feels more like a Kong movie than a Godzilla movie. Godzilla doesn't do much until the last act. And I think I know why that is.
Okay.
I think it's easier to anthropomorphize Kong.
No, of course.
So throughout the film, Kong is a character. And in sacrificing the human stories, Adam Wingard kind of focuses on Kong as a character. And you get to see these emotions on his face. And he's going through stuff, right? Because he's a monkey. He's an ape. Meanwhile, with Godzilla, he's just kind of the whole time.
Yeah, no, but I think my issue with all of that is there isn't any focus on Godzilla. Godzilla is literally just a specter on the other side of the planet, just wrecking shit for no reason. Just fucking tearing apart the earth.
That was my problem with the film. When you call it Godzilla X Kong, as much as I did have a good time at the cinema, it felt like Godzilla did very little. He was the nuclear weapon that you roll out at the end of the movie.
Yes, you're right. Exactly. And I felt cheated out of that. Like I was hoping for a really sort of 50-50 point of view, right? No, we're just following Kong. And Kong's great. I love Kong. A monkey's awesome. But you can't call a movie Godzilla X Kong and just ignore Godzilla. Fuck, dude. There was an entire moment where we had to watch Kong get a tooth removed. And like, okay, cute. But then you cut to the other side of the world and Godzilla just wakes up from a nap in the Colosseum and just wrecks France or something. Sure, he's chasing Mutos and all that. That's great. But Godzilla doesn't even have a human character with him, right? There's not even a person at Monarch saying, oh, Godzilla's on the go. It's just like nothing.
I'm okay with Godzilla not having a human character, but I felt cheated by the fact that Godzilla didn't have a proper storyline like Kong did. Kong had the toothache. Kong was in pain. Kong goes through shit. He gets augments.
Kong has moments where he's just by himself and the camera's following him.
So there have been 5 movies now in this franchise. And interestingly enough, I found the other 4 boring. In that I disliked almost all of the human characters in the previous Monsterverse movies. I'm so glad they don't have Millie Bobby Brown's character in this one. Or even Kyle Chandler, they didn't do anything. And I think by scaling down the human parts, it actually made the movie stronger. Because if I wanted that, I've got Monarch for that. And Monarch does that very, very well.
I agree with you. I thought the characters of the previous films were not good. However, I appreciate that there are characters. There are humans that I can follow. There's a reason that Millie Bobby Brown and Kyle Chandler and Alexander Skarsgård are there. They're trying to do science shit. The storyline's not great, but there's an attempt to be doing story stuff. Whereas here, I really zoned out a lot of this film.
I appreciated the other side. I appreciated the fact that they were trying to make the monsters into characters. And I appreciated that they too realized that the humans were a lost cause in trying to tell these stories without having to reboot the whole thing. Because the Japanese do it very well. In the Japanese versions of these movies, in the Japanese Godzilla movies, it's very character driven. Yes, there's a lot of monster stuff, and the monsters are there, but the entire POV is rooted in the characters.
You know what it is? The Japanese Godzilla monster movies almost feel like what Monarch is, right? Because the stories are told from a human point of view, trying to not necessarily solve it, but trying to figure out how to live in a world where titans exist.
Exactly. And the movies take a very different approach. At least these 5 movies take a very different approach, which is, what are these monsters? Aren't these monsters cool? What is their story? Oh, look at them blow shit up. Like, I appreciated the fact that the action didn't pull any punches with regards to showing us the monsters, because in the previous movies they used to do these things and maybe it was a cost issue, a visual effects thing, where you would get them in shadow and you would get sneak peeks of them until the very end. And I think we've reached that point now where we just see Godzilla and Kong, and you know what? The world is not ready. Colosseum, fuck the Colosseum. Pyramids, whatever. Who needs pyramids? I kind of like when disaster movies go that far. Like, nothing is sacred. Because the original Showa era movies did that, right? Like, just cities would get flattened.
That's not my issue with it. My issue with this, specifically this movie, it all just feels like, hey man, you know what would be funny? If Godzilla takes a nap inside the Colosseum.
They just traversed the world, destroying every city they came upon.
It feels like porn. You know what would be funny? Let's watch Godzilla just walk down the center of Rome and just flatten every fucking thing. Who gives a shit about humans? You know? And I think that's fine. But this just feels gratuitous. And then suddenly you're in Rio. Like, let's just... Like, I'm surprised they didn't get Godzilla to just grab the Cristo Redentor and stab the monsters with it.
Like Swayze in Roadhouse.
Yeah! Like, I don't know. I just found it really... It was a CGI slugfest, and I got kind of bored of that after the first slugfest.
This delivered what I was expecting from this movie. Like, my problem with the previous movies as well was that there was very little monster action, or the monster action wasn't that impressive. Yeah, sure, we had a Mechagodzilla, and that's all cool and shit in principle and technically, but for the most part, the delivery of the Mechagodzilla in the last movie I felt was underwhelming. And this one kind of gave me what I wanted with regards to the mythology of the monsters, the action of the monsters, and just having enough human side characters to fill in maybe a 30-page script.
Yeah. This is a 30-page script.
There was so little dialogue and even less that actually mattered.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, I don't think I would have felt the same way about this movie if I didn't have Monarch.
Oh, I think I would have hated this more if I didn't have Monarch.
Precisely. Like, for me, Monarch did so much heavy lifting, even though it doesn't actually tie into this movie at all.
Does it not?
Like, I don't think there were any Easter eggs. I didn't see any Easter eggs. So it's not like they referenced the series. And I don't know if they're doing that stupid DC thing where they want to keep it separate, which would be a mistake in my opinion.
I think they're keeping it separate enough in that so you don't need to get any of the show's casts to cross over. Let's be honest. I mean, the Godzilla films have dropped actors and characters left, right, and center, right? The only character that's only really mattered has been the monsters on screen and Monarch, the company.
I think Monarch did so much heavy lifting with regards to the mythology that we could go into this and have a CGI slugfest. But yes, if it was just a CGI slugfest and no Legacy of Monsters, I would be like, well, this just feels kind of pointless. And it's interesting how much heavy lifting that series actually did to make me enjoy this movie a lot more.
I agree with you with the Monarch stuff. For me, the problem may be that coming off of Monarch, I was expecting more from this, maybe. Maybe that was the other thing as well. Like, I expected some story. I expected a, not necessarily continuation of storylines, but maybe some development with regards to monster situations.
Can I just say something else, which I found very, very interesting? Of all the 5 Warner Monsterverse movies, this one has the smallest budget. The reported budget on this was 135 million, which I thought was very, very interesting and very impressive.
For 135 million, the CG looked very nice.
For 135 million, you can actually break even in this market. Because I think the global opening for Godzilla X Kong, The New Empire, is kind of predicted at 140 million or 120 million. So you're very close to your operating budget already. Compared to the last 2 movies, which were all closer towards 200 million. I think even the first Godzilla movie was 160 million. And so it's interesting that they've kept the budget as low as they have. And for me, any conversation about these big blockbusters has to involve a conversation about budget, because that is one of the biggest problems faced by Hollywood today. Everyone complains about movies not doing well, and everyone complains about the kind of movies they're getting in cinemas. And I think if more studios make a conscious effort to keeping these blockbuster budgets lower, 1, they're going to have more success, and 2, they may have a little more money to channel towards the more indie stuff that ends up winning them all the awards anyway.
They forget that it's not an infinite wallet that they're pulling from, right? Like, oh, I want 300 million for the DC movie, but then I also want 300 million for the other monster movie. And oh, look, I don't have any money for the awards movie. Why aren't people watching my movie? It's like, dude, you can't. You have to calm the fuck down, spend within your means, right? Like, you need a budget.
I think Adam Wingard did a pretty good job as a director in pulling off what he set to pull off. Like, for me, this movie achieved what it set out to do. And I think it's what all the previous movies were trying to do. I think it's what King of Monsters wanted to do. I think it's what Godzilla vs. Kong wanted to do. Like, King of Monsters was all about Godzilla exacting supremacy over all the other Mutos. But then it just kind of fell flat because we didn't get to see that supremacy in action. But in this movie, I think what I appreciated the most was it delivered on all of those promises. Like, hey, right from the beginning, I was promised a new world in Hollow Earth. I got it. I was promised a big bad. I got to see massive battles against monsters. So it kind of delivered on all of those promises instead of teasing me with it in a trailer and then not showing me anything.
You know what it is? I was actually frustrated with it. I was frustrated that there wasn't more story. I wanted more story. I felt like there was too much time spent with Kong, just doing Kong type things. I get what you're saying. I thought Tyree Henry felt his character was worse here than it was in the previous one. He's really just a jokey tinfoil hat guy now.
Yeah.
I don't know, Dan Stevens is suddenly in this. For a split second, I was thinking to myself, was he in the previous ones? He wasn't. I get what you're saying, and I can see that that is the argument that Adam Wingard and the production team were trying to do. Like, let's focus on the monsters and just have humans so we can have humans. But I just wanted more of a story. I really wanted more of a story.
I got that story from the monster POV. As in, I got the story I wanted from the monster POV, which is also the same thing I want from the Transformers movies. I want a Transformers movie that says, fuck off humans, you're completely uninteresting. I want this to be the stories about the robots. Because the cartoons were all about the robots.
Yeah.
Spike and Sparkplug were there, but they were literally human surrogates that we didn't need. Like, nobody was playing Spike and Sparkplug in the school canteen during recess time. Nope. Everybody wanted to be Optimus Prime. And I think there's a reason for that. They developed those robots as characters with proper emotion. I don't think they did that extremely well in this film. Like, I felt a connection to Kong, but I felt zero connection to Godzilla. But at the same time, I think it's an interesting direction. And that's what I appreciated, that they went, hey, what happens if we actually focus on the Mutos for a change? What would that movie look like? And I didn't mind it at all. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. Didn't work for me.
Godzilla X Kong, The New Empire, is now in Malaysian cinemas. Let us know what you think once you've seen it. Did it work for you like it did for me, or were you left bored like Bahir was? Did you find it tedious? Have you seen Monarch Legacy of Monsters? And did that help in the viewing of this film? You know how to reach out. Goggler MY, all of our social media feeds. You can also email us on podcast@goggler.my or send us a WhatsApp on the Goggler hotline 012-524-5208. Thank you so much for listening. This is the Goggler Podcast.